Welcome to Getting Intimate with Intimacy. I am Jamie London Wahlberg. My pronouns are he, they.
I'm Katie Jane, she, her.
And I am May. This is a space for deep exploration of the mind, body, and soul connection.
Getting Intimate with Intimacy covers consistent multimedia content spanning all forms of intimacy, from sexual to intellectual, and everything in between.
Our content is created for all beings, bodies, and abilities, age 18 and up.
And it can be enjoyed on YouTube as well as OnlyFans and Inside Timer. The links will be in the description on the for our live streams.
We're really looking forward to experiencing the infinite layers of intimacy with you.
And remember, intimacy starts within.
Namaste, everyone. Welcome back to Getting Intimate with Intimacy, episode 20. What a special number. We are here for our part 2, our deep dive, and thank God it's only part 2 because we have so much to talk about. We are back to talk more about how has the societal sexualization of the human body affected our lives and intimacy. Last week, we learned so much, and we're going to bring you back into a brief if you missed it as we dive into breakthroughs and continue our conversation. But before we do, a little introduction. I am Jamie, he, they pronouns.
I'm Katie Jane, she, her.
And I am May.
And we are here to get intimate with intimacy.
Yes.
Let's do a little recap, a little replay. Yes, I'm back, KJ. Yes. Sorry for those who saw that little blip there. I got kicked out of the studio, but we're back. Okay. So in episode 19, we started this conversation, and watching this back, I had some huge breakthroughs. And I'm going to start there with sort of categories of the breakthroughs, and then we'll talk about what people touched upon. And I'm going to wrap this up as quickly as possible, leading us into our conversation of today. So the big topics and breakthroughs that we talked about were around fear and lack and safety and shame, from God to society and everything between, mostly talking about nudity, periods, dancing, and weaving that through our experiences into womanhood and beyond within my transition. And the first breakthrough I had was while listening to May talking about how she was raised by her parents and she wasn't allowed to be naked on the beach, and she felt confused and some shame there, and realized that what I realized was that a lot of this has to do with our parents protecting us. They think they're protecting us because a child who wants to be free on the beach isn't thinking about predatorial adults. They're not thinking about pedophilia. They're not thinking about all these things. We just want to be free to be ourselves, and our parents are potentially wanting to protect us. So that was a huge breakthrough that I had, is realizing that in these moments, we do not have our own experience with no other experiences around us. So talking about parents projecting a lot onto us because they feel that they're protecting us, and the confusion that comes from not being told an explanation of something. So that was a really big topic that we dove into last time. And then KJ was sharing how she wasn't allowed to dance because of her parents and the religion, and how they may be coming from a fear protection mechanism as well from that space. Then we got into the periods and body shaming. And we said we're definitely going to be having a series on this because we all have experiences with periods, all three of us. And there was a lot that was coming up around there, and sexualization and beyond. And KJ was talking about not knowing what a period was. And we all shared our different experiences a little bit about periods, and how genders are of all kinds were really leading to a lot of confusion for her and those narratives, because they were touching without consent, and they didn't have an understanding of that, because something we talked about was how sexual education is absolutely awful all around the world, and that this has been failing us generationally, and that we are actually a product of course, those generations. And they're coming and explaining things and showing us and expressing us from the way that they were raised as well. And so this came into narratives of womanhood and hiding our own nature, which became a really big topic of how our bodies are natural and all of these processes are natural, and that we ought to have the ability to share what is in our nature. And this led into narratives of men and us talking about how the men have this silenced because they also have their own insecurities and objectification. But May had been talking about how men would just immediately get dressed after sexual intimacy and they would basically disconnect. And that was the process that I was realizing was happening there, the breakthrough around disconnection. They were just disconnecting from the experience, which would have been their emotions, right? Because after you're done with that sexual activity, there's the emotions that come from that intimacy and the powerful realization that May had around wanting to feel safe to be intimate and share that nakedness, that natural state of being. And that led us into a religious and spiritual conversation versus the sexualization of the media. And we were talking about, how there's all these rituals in society, and rituals that are in religion and spirituality that either say, do not be naked for this, or definitely be naked for this. And there's really no explanation, again, circling back to what May started in our last episode, talking about how there was no explanation. So there was no reason as to, you can't do this. Why? There was nothing about that. And this led into KJ bringing up some powerful realizations around increased confusion around the models and seeing the narratives and expectations of women and not understanding the right versus wrong. And then going to camp and suddenly being shocked because not understanding this way of being naked. And then suddenly all of these girls being naked and then propelling into the future of living in Norway, where there's like some of the most open narratives around nudity and sexuality in all of humanity, comes from there, and meeting people around the world and the shock that comes from all of that. And that led into a conversation of belonging and the tech generation. And I started to talk about that major impact of, now we wear all these masks in social media because we're questioning all of our insecurities on many different layers because we have all this information, and that we didn't have the information before. So if our sexual education was awful, or like KJ's experience where you don't get a sexual education because you're pulled out of it until much later, then you're ultimately totally confused because you have all of these narratives and ultimately these rumors like the sharks, chasing after you in the ocean, things like that. And then that led us into a transitioning in the media and talking about my transition and how suddenly within my transition, there were different rules that society had for me that lined with the media, and that I had no explanation in my education of what that was. So it was very isolating and confusing to try to figure that out. And that brought us into where we've left off and where we're leading into now, which is talking about the new narratives. And so the question is, what are the new narratives you want society to live by when it comes to the human body? And how will these narratives help society, as well as the intimacy of humans on a more micro level? And now you are caught up. I feel like that was pretty fast. We covered a lot. And now also let's give an opportunity for us sort of to have reflections from KJ and May into the recap, because I feel like I got to weave in some of my realizations within that. May, did any realizations come through this time and you starting to dive into this? And feel free to start answering our new question.
Well, I either start the new question or I go back to some things that I realized the other day as we were having the episode, but couldn't reflect on them, and also a few things that came up right now after what you shared. So where should I go?
Do that first, because I want to touch on some stuff too before we move on to the next question. So go for it.
Okay. So I'm going to go back as well. Something that, for example, was mind blowing to me, and I think it was the first time that I officially realized how the breasts have been sexualized, is when I went to Ethiopia 8 years ago, and I spent there a few weeks working with an NGO and I noticed after a few days that any woman was breastfeeding in publicly, and no one would pay attention. Any woman anywhere, but they couldn't show their almost no part of their legs, like, and anything above the knees included, was completely out of the question. That was considered, and actually twice that I was wearing short trousers, not too short, but kind of short, like two men on the street, they pointed out that that was not acceptable. And so I thought, how come they accept the breasts, they don't accept the legs? And I was like, this totally proves that in the Western world, we have sexualized the breast, because for them, they are not erotic. But other parts of the body, the ones that have been kept hidden, those are the erotic ones. The legs, for example. And that what kept me thinking quite a lot about it. And I read quite a lot about it as well, as like there's a natural attraction in general from males towards female about their breasts. Like there's no discussion that this can have like an aesthetic attraction towards it, but it's not properly sexual. Sexual are the genitals. The rest of the body, you can find it more or less erotic, naturally or culturally. But from my perspective today, the breast should have always been left aside. And so that we, humans on a female body, don't have to be covering our breast all the time, everywhere, our nipples, even if I'm cold. Like I'm ashamed always that my nipples may be hard and they may be showing a little bit on my shirts. And now, since last year, I started being conscious about this, and I'm like, how come I'm feeling shame about this? This is crazy. Just to point out something that I think it's interesting to reflect a little bit more on.
That just blew my mind a little bit. I'm gonna have to sit with that. Throwing it to KJ. Go from there. That's very insightful.
I love that, May. And Jamie, thank you for the very concise
Yes, absolutely.
recap. I enjoyed that. It was fun because you kind of brought all the pieces together, and we did touch on a lot that time. May, I can totally resonate like with what you're saying and that journey of thinking about my breasts, and the same thing with the nipples. I was so self-conscious about that as a teenager and a young woman because I developed fully, like really fast. And so I had bigger breasts, and that was something I was like, I had a fear of when I was young, was that my nipples would be popping out. So I went to great lengths to buy bras that were padded extra in that area to avoid it. But I also similarly, like over the last few years, I've gotten conscious about it in a different way of that, like it's natural. Like it shouldn't be a problem if I get cold and somebody sees my nipples, like that's on them. Like does it have to be sexual? Right. But that is the story that we've been programmed, and it's still widely, distributed and adhered to by so many folks, that there is that level of self-consciousness still surrounding that. Another thing that I wanted to touch on before we move on to the next question, though it is a great question, was we were talking about how the societal sexualization of the human body affected our lives and intimacy, but also we were talking about the lack of education, right? As female-bodied individuals. So me being pulled out of sexual education classes, not knowing about my period, that was traumatic enough. But then I didn't really know what was supposed to happen or not happen when you lost your virginity.
Until when? When did you find out, Katie? Do you remember when that happened? Age?
Well, so bear with me with the story. I'll tell you, I was 26 when I lost my virginity.
Okay.
And the guy that I was with didn't believe that I was a virgin.
Okay.
Because he said his experience with other virgins had been different, that they bled, that they had pain, and I didn't have those things.
Oh, okay.
And I knew that I was a virgin, but I knew nothing about the hymen. I'd heard a couple of different versions, like theories from other girls who had not lost their virginity about how it should be or ought to be. So I had a lot of confusion about that. At least I was grateful that I had friends outside of the church at that time that I could talk to, right? That did have more sexual experience, that immediately reassured me it's different for everybody, right? It's different for everybody. You could have popped it with a tampon or masturbating or any of that stuff, right? And
exercising, they also say sometimes it could happen.
Right. So there's a variety of actual options and the way that things work, but I didn't even know about the anatomy. I didn't know about my body, right? I didn't know the pieces that belong in that system and like how things might happen. And so that was extremely upsetting to be gaslit in that moment of like, I just went to all of this turmoil to even get to this point, to lose my virginity, and then to be immediately discounted, right? Or told that I was a liar or somehow dirty or wrong or any of that. It was very disconcerting, right? Like my nervous system was extremely dysregulated. And for a while, like I remember doing a lot of research after that, again, like besides talking to my friends, just trying to figure out what the case was. I don't think I even ever talked to a doctor about it. I just didn't even want to bring it up because of that remnant of shame, that story of shame. Like now looking back on it, I have no shame about that experience. I have outrage. I have like, what the actual heck, you know, to that guy, because he also had misinformation.
Absolutely. Yeah.
He was from another country and I don't know what he learned, right? Like, but all he had to go off was his experience. So he told me that based on his experience, I was wrong or I was not telling the truth, right? So that was pretty messed up. And there's just, I think there's a lot of, this kind of goes into the question that we are looking towards answering next, right? I want better education, positive, factual education for boys and girls about anatomy, right? And about how that can be different for different bodies and like what the process involves or what are the other options that can cause that to not be the case, right? In a sexual encounter. So that was just another thing that did come up last episode that I was like, oh, I gotta touch on that one. So I'm not sure if you'd like to respond to that before we move on, either one of you.
May, did you want to respond? Yes, thank you, KJ.
To what she said now?
Yes. Did you have a response, or did you want to move? Are you ready to move on?
No, I just wanted to say that thank you for what she shared, and then we can move on if you want to the next thing. Thank you so much, dear. Yes.
Yes. No. I'm very grateful that both of you shared this, deeper awareness in these stories, and I think it really emphasizes what we've been talking about, and we keep leading to, these main themes of basically feeling lied to, feeling shame, and how we don't, and feeling confused, and how we don't want any of this to happen. And we're acknowledging that this is true for everybody. There are likely very few people on this planet that were lucky enough to have an open-minded, awake and aware modern parent who is a sexologist and, some form of doctor and gave like an incredible talk. I mean, I don't even know what that percentage is, but like there's a tiny percentage of trans people, and even smaller percentage of trans Jewish people. And I fit into those windows, and there are even less people who probably were raised with these proper narratives. So I think we ought to just, lead into our conversation, and answer to what KJ started to, which is, the narratives, specifically what are the new narratives you want society to live by when it comes to the human body, and how will these narratives help society, as well as the intimacy of humans on a more micro level. And I feel like the action that we want them to take in big part is better sexual education. And I think for me, to piggyback on what KJ is sharing around that, is that it's got to be inclusive, and it's got to be thorough, and not fear based, but action based, and not consequence based, but celebration based. And what I mean by that is including all the body types, including all the genders, including multiple sexuality. And I'm not saying teaching something, erotic too early or something of that nature, but there's a rapid growing awareness around identities at a younger age, around what it, desires, and clothing is changing. I mean, a lot of these narratives are changing, and if we do not build sexual education that includes this, then there's going to be greater issues here, because what they were answering before too is like the hiding of and the shame and the fear, around gay people having to do with HIV and AIDS. And now society is finally starting to bridge in this gap of releasing that shame, creating support, creating prevention, creating more education. And so being able to do that now, hopefully we can start to build in this. Because if I had an incredible amount more of awareness around this in sexual education for the LGBTQ AI2S plus community, like, I can't fathom that it would have taken me so long to figure out who I am and how to properly consent and live by my truth and create healthy boundaries and all these things. But I feel like the narratives that I want whatever of these actions to be focused on, the narratives that I want are ones where we are celebrating and honoring our natural, authentic selves and the evolutionary process of what it is to be human, and celebrating that among the stages in a way that everyone feels prepared. And that's going to look different and feel different for everyone. So I want narratives that are non-judgmental and are both science and spirit based, so that way people can feel holistic belonging and a sense of safety, both within themselves and also understanding the resources that they have and making those resources more available, and celebrating people having the courage to seek out these resources. And instead of censoring questions and curiosity, um, focusing on creating safe spaces where that can be held, and supported and allowed for. Of course, age appropriate matters, like safety matters, and also everything being rooted in consent, because I still don't really remember much of that dialogue happening. And it needs to be happening way, way earlier, and probably good touch, bad touch needs to be earlier as well. How are you feeling about this, Mayor KJ? Who wants to jump in?
So I remember pretty well that I was taught about sexuality when I was 12 at school, at my early 12s, I think. And it was covered in 2 pages of the book of natural sciences, I think it was, something of that sort. And that was it. And we were kind of all silly about it, because we were talking about things that we had no idea. We were so kind of immature. But that's how society makes you when you get to be something that should be so natural and you should know and learn from before. Then you get silly about it. Oh, look at this and that, and kind of silly, completely silly. And now that I'm studying sexology, there's a big debate about. So almost everyone understands and believes that sexual education is very important if we want to have a positive experience about sex and intimacy throughout adulthood. But now the thing is like when to start it. So some say that it should start before adolescence because once you are there, you should be prepared for adolescent in a way, but it cannot be too early because there is this huge fear that it may look or feel erotic and that we may be waking up erotic feelings too early. Now, those who are in favor of starting it pretty early, they say that in the few places where it has been tested sexual education before adolescence, it hasn't proved afterwards that they started having sexual interactions before any other children. Like they were conscious of what are the pros and cons and how to. It just didn't, for the few tests that are out there, it didn't prove that actually starting the sexual education earlier made young people get into sexual interactions earlier as well. There is no association of that, but that's the greatest fear in a way. But on the other hand, I'm asking myself, like, if you clearly explain how important it is to protect yourself, what is really, why are adults so afraid that adolescent may start instead of at 16 years old, 14 or 13, having sex if it's conscious on a psycho-emotional level and physically they are protected? Why are we so scared about sex? What is so wrong about it? I don't understand.
Those are valuable points. I feel like for me, what it brought up is thinking again, how I mentioned last episode and then the recap about, well, actually, I don't know if I mentioned the recap, but I had this very confusing sexual, experience when I was 6 with another 6-year-old, right? Unsupervised and in an educational environment, to boot. And I definitely find myself as I'm listening to you and I'm so curious about more of these studies and the statistics because I definitely think that had there been some form of information, I don't think that would have happened. And I wouldn't have lived this narrative of feeling like it happened to me and almost more traumatizing than the incident itself, which in the moment felt more confusing than and like dissociative than traumatizing, was the aftermath. Why? Because kids can be really mean if they're not taught how
There
to
is no
navigate
filter.
these things. And people went running around our public pool claiming that I had sex with this person, and we were children. And guess what? None of the adults did anything about it. No one believed me, nothing happened. And so this was obviously incredibly traumatic. And thankfully, kids do move on from things very quickly. Of course, easier the younger that you are. But that did not mean that that trauma did not completely become my narrative, build all these different narratives for years. To the degree that literally in part in preparation of this conversation today, I was sitting with it all over again. And I'm trying to think of other perspectives and narratives of how to look at it because I'm like, was it something that I actually mutually agreed to and like didn't really, because I didn't understand what was happening, that it actually wasn't as traumatic as it, I mean, I don't know, but it's hearing that from you, May, is like, I almost like would double down on it. Like I'm at least doubling down on wanting more studies done and like having more questions answered because I do think it would have been a huge change. And when it comes to the education at that level, like I don't think that we need, like I don't even know that sex is like the language needs to be the same or things like that. It's in
Right.
the same way that I say with when people start freaking out about like, oh, like how can you have your 2-year-old transition? Like, you mean just let your 2-year-old wear a dress that you decided was a boy? Like, you don't need to go from 0 to 1,000.
Yeah.
Like, we're not talking about medicalizing children. I'm very adamantly against medicalizing children. I think that there is a way there's 1,000 ways to go about it, and there's probably ways to talk about at the beginning. And I would actually say how we always talk about how intimacy starts within. Like, how about that? How about just helping these little kids learn about who they are and celebrating who they are? And maybe that's the type of conversation that's actually needed. I don't know. I could go on about this, but I'm really eager to know what KJ feels.
It's all so good. Such a good conversation. And something when you were talking earlier, Jamie, a word you didn't say, but it's like the underlying concept is acceptance, right? It's education, but also acceptance, and like factualizing it. Like, well, if we're talking about educating children, facts are facts. This is your body. This is the system. These are the different parts that make up this system and this system. That's your anatomy, right? Anatomy and physiology. And not making it sexual. And when you were speaking, I was like, that's the problem. It's the fear and the already existing harmful narratives that instigate that fear in adults of sexualizing children or them finding out too early, right? But it's not finding out too early if it's just education. If it's just talking about the facts and about your body and understanding and accepting your own body and how it functions and what adolescence does to your body, right? Like how you experience those changes and how different bodies experience them differently, right? The fact that there are hormones, talk about all that, the natural components of it would desexualize and destigmatize it, right? Just to have that acceptance of like, this is how things are. Don't have to talk about sex until they're old enough to be doing those things, right? And then have that healthy understanding. And I think also when you both touched on consent in our schools, it is being taught younger now, because I know other people my age that have kids and they are having those conversations earlier. Safety and consent and positive touch. Yeah. They are definitely teaching that, at least in kindergarten, I think pretty widely, if not before. And I know that more parents, that a component that occurred to me, if we're talking about changing narratives, if you have a preschool, if you have kindergarten aged children where we are having those conversations, there should be parent classes as well to make sure the community of caregivers that are raising the children are also all on the same page, also have the same level of education and acceptance. So that
Yes,
was
because I think obviously we should be, thank you, Katie, in line in education at home and at school, because otherwise it's confusing for the children, because it's not just what you say, it's what they see and what they hear. So if we don't make the human body once and for all completely natural and beautiful, and we don't make sex also as something natural and beautiful, I don't really know how we're going to progress, because it's like on the structure of our concept of how we get into this world, which there's nothing more natural than that. If we don't really change the structure of how we see our sexual bodies and our sexual interactions, it's like we go around the topic, but there is no real progress. And even you see that, I think in some places, probably at school, maybe in some places they are more advanced than what the parents may be like. Nobody talks about masturbation, nobody talks about intimacy in general, and it's like many topics that for adults are still how are we going to help children or adolescents to enjoy it and to have a natural relationship with their bodies and other people's bodies? Like my nephew, he asked me, I think it was like 6 months ago, so he was just 7. He asked me how the children came into the world. And because I'm not her mother, I didn't reply to that. So I explained, I had already talked to him about a few things without getting into that particular topic. And I told him a little bit, and he said, yeah, I know it comes from the woman's body. There is a whole, I told him just about that like a little long ago. But then he said, but how does it start? And I'm like, ask your parents, because, and he said, why? And I said, because parents normally, there's something that they enjoy to share with their children, and I'm sure they would like them to be the first to explain this to you. And I don't know if that conversation happened or not, but I would have answered because, and I finish with this, in psychology in general, there is an acceptance that there is some form of maturity that happens around 7. So 7 and 12, for example, are years where it's considered that the human brain and your maturity and your self-consciousness, it goes like a higher level. So maybe we could just say from 7 years onwards, especially if they ask, can we just not state the truth as how it happens? And allow them to be curious about it and explain to them, and they may not like it, or they may not, but it's what it is. We can't change it. We haven't made it up. So it's like we came here and this was already the system. So I don't know.
I think that was a very valuable share. What it's showing me right now is something that we've been talking about for many episodes, that we don't dance around, because we don't dance around on intimacy here. We get intimate with it. Is really this dichotomy of the education coming from this fear and this love, right? And that middle ground breakthrough that I had, that I was expressing earlier in the recap, was about protection, right?
Mhm.
You know, ultimately, because again, that the parents are taught varying degrees of the same, or frankly worse than what we were even taught, which is even almost more mortifying. Because worse in this context specifically meaning less information at all, and less correct information, and even more critical and censored via religion, spirituality, and media narratives, to where they are now. You know, they're super insecure too, and it's I smiled because that story with your nephew is really sweet. That purity and that innocence and that consciousness. And when you were saying the 7 to 12, I was like, oh yeah, gene keys, that's what they talk about in gene keys, is the age 7 to 12, and makes total sense. But when you said, that you were explaining, oh well, the parents enjoy it, and it's like, in my mind, I know that you also know that they are mortified to have this conversation, and even every media
They will
representation
not explain it to him.
yeah, that's put out, is like they're freaked out. And so it also, like, I'm tripling down on this parents having classes, because they're all just as traumatized. And the reason that the conversation hasn't been happening is both a fear of the fear of them not being protected and it being too early, but also their own fears, and their own insecurities and their own lack of information, right? When any human feels confident, right, and has the courage, one of our buzzwords here, to talk about something to someone who's their child, or someone who's just simply youth in the collective, uh, that's much easier, right? They know what they're going to say. They're prepared because of their own experiences, and they feel solid in what they're saying, whether it's major air quotes, right or wrong, or like factual or not. They feel great about it, right? But when you feel insecure, and that fear and that lack, and you're coming from your own trauma and narratives, then of course it's going to be even more muddled. So what comes to mind is like how kids are taught with like the birds and the bees, right? Like, well, when one parent loves another parent, and so in a way they're like bringing this beautiful narrative of the love and the nature, but they're also in a way using that to hide some of the facts, right? Because when you're talking about like, yes, it's beautiful, this love, but that's not always what's happening, not only in the non-consensual state, but even the consensual state. And again, certain ages, that's going to be an appropriate conversation to have, right? But again, it's like it comes down to us needing to heal within our own narratives. The older that we get, the more important it becomes. So that way we give a chance for these youth to have clarity. Because what we all discussed is confusion, and confusion breeds fear. And fear blocks love, even though fear comes from love and that desire to protect. So these new narratives need to come from a healed space. KJ, what is it that you feel called to share? I felt it. Saw that. You're muted.
Yes.
It says that you're not muted, but somehow you are muted. There you go.
Better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Are you back? Okay. Hopefully that doesn't. Let me know if I mute out again if this dies.
You were there the whole time until that moment.
That was weird. What occurred to me earlier while May was talking was about when we're talking about the age, like what's age appropriate, but what's not it's not inappropriate if we're just talking about our bodies, right? That's the whole concept that we're getting at, naturalizing things, right? We are here. This is the body I was born in. This is the body that you're in. This is the experience that you're likely to have, right?
It cut out.
Sound.
I think your mic died. Yeah, just swap it. Now you're muted officially. Yeah, there you go.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes.
Yes. Okay. All right. We're back. It's not inappropriate if we're just talking about it from a nature standpoint, right? That's kind of the ongoing discussion. When is it inappropriate? Well, that's when you're talking about the existing narratives that have stigmatized sex, right? And how we talk about our bodies and how we embrace or don't embrace or have or don't have the knowledge, right, about all of the things. And what occurred to me earlier when May was talking was again, just thinking back to my own experience of complete lack of information, right? I was sheltered to the max and therefore kept naive to a harmful degree, to be very clear. But also, I wasn't, therefore, like, I think, again, it's so interesting because it's so personal, right? Every child and every adolescent is going to experience their body changing differently. It happens at different times. So for me, I was not even thinking about sex or sexual attraction when I had my period. Not for a few years, even. Like, I don't think I flipped that switch until around 16. And then it was mass confusion, right? Due to the lack of information and the negative teachings that I did have personally. But I wasn't even there. And then we talk about kiddos that are neurodiverse, which I am also, right? We mature at different rates, right? And then that's different female to male, right? I just, like, if you're focused on something completely else, like, that might develop later. And that's okay. And to have that conversation of like, hey, your body's going to do this, this, and this. If you do or don't have any kind of feelings about it, that's okay, right? Like, one way or the other, whenever it happens. And again, making sure that parents are educated to then be able to hold that space for the kids positively, right? To be like, hey, when this happens, it's okay. If it doesn't happen, that's okay. And either way, you are welcome to come and talk to me about it. Like, you know, that's what I desire to see. Better role models too, even for the kids that are not their parents, right? I wouldn't want any of, like, if I had kids now, I wouldn't want them talking to my brothers about that. No, they're still in that system. Like, so just in general, and again, as adults, we have those choices. We curate our communities, right? We know, and we have a watchful eye on who's around our children or the children we are responsible for, right? So you kind of curate your community and you have the ability to do that. But I just think it's such a valuable component that is becoming clearer to me that was missing, right? Is making sure all the parents are on the same page, and then having that safe space for the children. Just the lack of fear overall. I know we've talked about this multiple times in all of the ways with intimacy, right? We hold a vision for society in the future where everybody is not afraid to speak their truth. And it starts with things like this, with teaching children natural acceptance and knowledge of the body, I think, and then having that the education as they get older as to what may happen, how they're going to feel, but like, it's okay to communicate whatever it is, right, in the moment to the appropriate adults. Be like, hey, this is a safe space, you know, in the house, come and talk to me about anything, anytime. And then you talk about boundaries and social boundaries and maybe what not to discuss at school or in the public, or right, you know, things like that. But yeah, I love this conversation overall. Super, super valuable. I appreciate both of you and your shares today too.
It was valuable. It was so valuable. And you know, the last thing I want to say, piggybacking off of your awesome
Is it the end?
Yes, expansion. Yes, it is. But we have one more episode to talk about it.
Yes,
We're gonna be okay. But I'm gonna state this because KJ literally just said it, so there's no reason for me not to respond to what she said with this. Which is expanding upon your expansion, KJ, which is the separation aspect. I can't end this without bringing this up in 2 sentences, really, which is we need to stop separating the sexes and the genders to the degree that we are doing it when we are doing this education, especially when it comes to just our bodies. Number one, this is going to end confusion. And number two, I am totally a believer in separating to some degree so that way people can feel safe to have discussions that they wouldn't feel safe otherwise. But that's often going to be with the older ages, even before the younger ones. But if we keep separating it, we're going to continue with the confusion. And also for those who may end up as within different gender and changing their bodies or whatever the case may be, that is not going to be supported one way or the other, and there's going to be confusion around that way. And so that can be a really big way to minimize confusion. Also, as we've talked about in other episodes, when you're told not to do something, you automatically want to do it. So if we can desexualize and we can naturalize these conversations, then we can create a neutral space where there's less confusion. A final quick thought, May, before we close out?
I would love next week to talk about sexual desire as something important to share with them. When this comes up, they need to know how it feels, what it is about, and how to separate your inner experience of desire with the action of having a sexual interaction with someone. There's a huge gap. And if you understand that this doesn't have to, when A happens inside, B doesn't necessarily need to happen, I think that's very important to understand how sexual desire, it may come in you at 10, at 11, at 12, 13, we don't know. But when it comes, you should have a little understanding of what is going on and what to do about it when this happens. Yes. And for example, and if you were like very strong, that doesn't, to disassociate, like just because you can have a sexual interaction because you have the sexual desire, it doesn't mean that you should. and like to create the consciousness of the consent and the right moment and the right situation, everything about it, everything.
Absolutely agree. That's a great place to complete for today, and we are super excited to be back with you again next week at our new time. It will be our part 3, our second deep dive on how has the societal sexualization of the human body affected our lives and intimacy. We will be back here. KJ, was there one more thing?
I just really quickly wanted to acknowledge the comments, Yoni. I did see you showed up. Thank you for being here. I appreciate you to answer the question. She was speaking about Africa, particularly, where breasts are not seen or experienced.
Ethiopia.
And Yoni says, I'm okay that mine are erotic. And honestly, I'm with you. I'm with you on that one, Yoni. I'm okay with it. I'm okay with it both ways because everything is intertwined, right? We do have breasts to breastfeed babies. And if somebody's attracted to you, they're attracted to you. So I'm here for it all.
100%. And I think that's another great conversation for us to have, you know, in terms of adulthood. Today, we focused a lot on youth, right? And bridging that gap. So maybe next time we'll also focus a little bit more on when we're older and healing those wounds and the fact that it's totally okay to have consensual sexualization, right? But maybe that it's not, you know, maybe we have different phrasing for it, and language evolves and will continue to evolve, and maybe we'll dive into that as well. I'm seeing May smiling, so I'm sure there's something brewing there, but we are going to complete this episode because otherwise we'll never complete this episode.
Yes.
So we will see you next week on Tuesday, 11 a.m. PST, 2 p.m. EST, 8 p.m. CET, and all the other time zones. Make sure that you are subscribing to us, and click that little bell so that you get the notifications and that it shows up for you in that time zone. We're so excited to continue this conversation with you. You can also learn more about us and what we do and our co-coaching and collaborations that we do both privately and workshops. So if that's something that interests you, our website is scrolling here, wake-in.com/intimacy. And we look forward to getting intimate with you again next week. And remember,
Intimacy starts within.
Namaste. Be well.
Bye.